All right, y'all, welcome back to the channel, man. So, my first video, we reacted to an Uncle Scoop 1v1 from the YouTube basketball scene. Today, we will be reacting to Comics Explained. He's a pretty much explains comics. He talks through different comic panels. And for those of y'all who don't know, I am a huge superhero geek, Marvel, DC, whatever, bro. I'm tapped in, bro. Currently in my garage just because I like the natural lighting and it's people inside sleep. So, bye. My name Caleb. This is my second video. So I'm kind of just trying to do a vast variety. That's the right terminology. Kind of just trying to do that. So let's get to it.
What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we have a lot of catching up to do. So, we are picking up with Ultimate End and the Maker fighting for 2,000 years. So, what this does is this picks up 700 years in, and it kind of focuses on what happened when you had Howard Stark and the Maker going into the city at the end of Ultimate Invasion. Now, for those of you guys who need a bit of a refresh here, because it's been a while since we talked about this part of the Ultimate Universe,
Bro, this
as most of you
camera.
guys are probably aware,
Oh,
the Maker had jumped to this reality, Earth 6160, from the main Marvel Universe. And when he did, he started going through time and changing things. And so this ultimately led to Howard Stark and a handful of others, Kang from the future, showing up, confronting the Maker, and the whole battle took place inside the city within Latveria, the Maker's base of operations. At the end of Ultimate Invasion, the dome of the city was closed. And then we here in the real world were given a 2-year window. At the end of that 2 years, either the superheroes would go in or the dome would come down. As it's going right now, the Ultimates.
hey, tell me how excited y'all are for Doomsday coming out this year, man. I'm so excited, bro. But I'm not gonna lie, I'm excited for Spider-Man too. People they skipping past Spider-Man because it comes out the same year as Doomsday. Spider-Man is about to be lit, bro. We're getting the Incredible Hulk back. We're getting him back.
Basically this universe's version of the Avengers, have gone into the city. And now we're finding out what's been happening the entire time. So 700 years in, right, Howard Stark says, I bravely sacrificed myself, setting off Soul's hammer in the city center, destroying Research District 1 just days before a breakthrough with their chronal battering ram, which would have allowed them to pop the Darwin bubble early, so to lower the dome. And he says, consumed by a million undone suns, the screams of dying children, terrible and inspiring. 80 years in, just the other day, I faced him a long time ago, still holding on to old habits, pretending to be what he wasn't. I felt a snap of nostalgia just before I felt the snap of my neck, and then nothing at all. 444 years in, legions of living weapons, fighting street by sentient street, watching as his children slaughtered mine, our perfected forms of death and destruction to make Plato proud. Poor Death's Head 18. He was always my favorite. And that's where Tony is just like, okay, you need to chill. But he continues on, right? 1,310 years in, leading a raid gone wrong long after he'd given up all pretense of humanity. The nauseating chemical taste of the Maker forcing himself down your throat. Do you know the sound your lungs make when they explode? It's just a puffing sound. And Tony tells him, you're not making any sense, right? Stop jumping around and just start at the beginning. You were trapped here in the city, right? Begin with the beginning. And that's where Howard fires back and just says, the Forever War defies traditional chronology and continuity. It rejects attempts to connect cause and effect. Its order is a higher order, war in 4 dimensions. Now, all he's really saying here is, number one, he's crazy. He's lost his mind, and I imagine just being alive for 2,000 years is going to
Those
be
of y'all who
the
don't know,
human
the
mind.
Maker is evil Reed Richards. I think from the Absolute Universe, but he's Reed Richards pretty much if he was evil. So he's a little spooky because we all know Reed Richards is intelligent. He's that nigga. So if he was evil, bro, he could really do some things. A lot of these heroes, if they were evil, they could just wreak havoc. So
Mind, no matter how intelligent it is, was not meant to experience 2,000 years of constant living. After a while, all the memories become become a jumble. It just kind of becomes this chaotic mess. So when he talks about the idea of the Forever War, that's actually something that he references later on and kind of explains what the Forever War is, even though he doesn't necessarily do it very well right now. But what matters here is that because they've been fighting for so long, and because the memories are so jumbled, it's almost impossible to know exactly what happened when. And that's why he says things like, just the other day, I fought him a long time ago. Because for him, his first fight with the Maker may have been 80 years ago. It may have been 1,300 years ago, right? The times and places of these things just kind of get lost. And so that's where, in hearing all of this, Peter Parker's just like, we all have crazy family. I've got a great aunt who collects other people's taxidermied pets. The whole house is full of stuffed dogs, cats, even goldfish, which the goldfish part is weird, right? But that's where Tony asks, what did you mean the Maker is the city? And that's where Howard fills him in. And he says, there I was, right? 1,610 years in. And I watched helpless as he absorbed the city mind, spreading like an oil spill, coating every atom. Fruiting bodies burst, spreading microplastic Maker spores. And that's where all these different forces of the Maker were breathing them in. Right? And Howard Stark says, silicon machinery that remodels minds into receivers, extensions of the Maker mind. So for those of you guys who are familiar with Star Trek, we're basically talking about the Borg, is really what this is an allegory to. Right? For those of you guys who don't know about Star Trek, the Borg are cyborgs, right? Borg is just a shorthand name for cyborg. But up until the stupid introduction of the Queen, there was never really any particular leader cast within the Borg. It was just all these individuals functioning as a cohesive unit, a hive mind, essentially. Except here, you have the Maker kind of controlling everybody. And so in hearing that, Tony Stark kind of points out the oily smog. That's what they first encountered when they came into the city. Initially, it gave off the appearance of it being something akin to like machinery, right? Pumping smog into the atmosphere and industrialization and so on and so forth. But that's where Howard says, if you take a breath, you will lose yourself and you will become an appendage, an extension of the Maker. And so Tony Stark points out that's why you extended the Darwin bubble and you did it to keep the Maker cloud contained. And Howard says exactly, right? Containment. It's the only workable strategy, delaying the inevitable. Now, that whole point of delaying the inevitable, that hits into the nature of the Forever War. And that's what we'll talk about here in a second. Because at that point, America Chavez chimes in, right? It's not really much of a delay. I mean,
Yeah, okay, so if you ask me, I feel like they could go so many ways with Doomsday because I heard they're gonna split Secret Wars into two parts. So we're really gonna get Doomsday and then Secret Wars Part 1 and Part 2. I think we need a Secret Wars Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. Me personally. And I think they all need to be like 3 months apart. But if they do two of them, they need to be like 6 months apart. But man, I would just love for them not to dial down our heroes. Like in Infinity War, the only complaint I had was obviously the Hulk not coming back, but also Vision. Like we all know Vision is so powerful. They dumbed him down in Civil War because they had him fighting amongst fucking super soldiers and humans. And then they dumbed him down in Infinity War when he was just stabbed and couldn't do nothing the rest of the fight. So we got heroes now like Sentry. We still got Hercules lurking around. We got Wanda. We got mutants finna come in like Jean Grey and all these Omega levels. And I just hope they don't get dumbed down. Just give a glimpse of what they could do. Just give a glimpse, but don't dumb them down. Like I just don't want to see Bob the whole fucking Secret Wars. I don't want to see that shit. I want to see the Sentry. I want to see the Void come out, the real Void, not that little shadow casting nigga. I want to see the Void from the comics. I want to see a monster nigga, like. And I hope they show like the actual incursions. I want to see the worlds collide.
The way the bubble works, only a few microseconds have passed outside since we've been in here, right? And that's where Howard says, I don't really remember what's outside the wall, but I'm sure it's important, right? I had to buy time. So I reversed the field, which means instead of an astronomical amount of time passing on the outside, while a very short amount of time passes inside the city, it's the inverse. Because remember, that's what it was supposed to be. It was basically supposed to be as if you could somehow confine the Maker down to slow motion. So from his perspective, he's moving in real time. But outside of the city, things are passing by at light speed, right? Thousands upon thousands of years pass. The Ultimates have been operating under this assumption the entire time. But finding out that it's reversed, Spider-Man points out, if that's true, then it means that even though we've only been in here for a few minutes, months have passed outside. And so that's when you start to learn that in the months that have passed, there's effectively a kind of like zombie virus of sorts that have kind of spilled out into the streets of Latveria. Truth to tell, this is just kind of a callback to the original Ultimate Comics, because that's where the zombie virus started within Marvel, right? But beyond that, and the fact that Latveria is essentially quarantined, we start to find out certain things, right? For example, just kind of the Phantom Reporter, as it's pointed out, that heaven remains quarantined from outsiders, with all gates now guarded by Bruce Banner's forces, but it's simply just too late. Now, for those of you guys who have forgotten about that, the Incredible Hulk is essentially Iron Fist in this Ultimate Universe, and so when it says that he guards heaven, he's guarding the 7 heavenly cities, right, of the Iron Fist mythos. So essentially these, extra-dimensional realms. But he also has his immortal weapons and so on and so forth. So that kind of feeds into the nature of Matt Fraction's run and how all that stuff was explained. Just simply know that they guard these kind of extra-dimensional spaces, and no one can essentially leave Earth and travel there, right? But the Phantom Reporter also points out that the forces of heaven, right, the good guys who are kind of working against the Incredible Hulk and all those guys, that they've been preaching democracy and radical nonviolent resistance. Followers literally light themselves on fire in protest. But what's kind of crazy about this is that while immolating yourself doesn't
Chat, hold on. All right, we back. I had to put my clothes in the dryer. I got work in a couple hours.
really do anything against the forces that you're fighting. In this particular instance, people being forced to watch it are also forced to confront the fact that they kind of let things get to this point to a degree. So if anything, it serves as some measure of an inspiration for Iron Fist and his forces, however violent this may be. But it continues on. In the North American Union, Univision and anti-war machines have destroyed most of the Hand Hela fleet and freed the Rust Belt, which is a major blow to the Council. Of course, the Council basically being the Illuminati, the guys who control the world or controlled the world in the Maker's absence. Now they've just kind of fled to the four corners, with some of them kind of fighting their own individual wars, but the Council is effectively broken up by all standards of measurement. Right? But something to keep in mind here is that Hand is basically like S.H.I.E.L.D. within the main Marvel Universe, except instead of focusing on threats that are a danger to life on Earth, they focus on threats that are a danger to the Maker's power and to the Council's power and control of the world. But now it's basically being undone. So again, all this is to say the good guys are basically fighting the fight and they're taking the world back. And so at that point, you switch over to Wakanda. And the way this whole conversation goes is it actually takes place between Eric Killmonger and T'Challa. Now, T'Challa's role within the Ultimate Universe has kind of been a source of debate among the comic book community, mostly because of the fact that he doesn't really operate like the Black Panther we're traditionally used to, which is to say, being out there on the front lines, taking the fight directly to the enemy, that kind of thing. He acts more like a king, right, sitting on his throne, kind of partaking in various, gubernatorial policies and so on and so forth. Eric Killmonger is really the one that gets out there. Now, the nature of Eric Killmonger and the reason why he's being brought directly to T'Challa is that during the Ultimate Black Panther line, Eric Killmonger and Storm were freedom fighters, and they were also lovers at the same time. Because in this new Ultimate Universe, you have what's called the Upper and Lower Kingdoms, which are basically ruled by Ra and Khonshu, which collectively are Moon Knight. But all that really means is that outside of Wakanda, they control basically all of Africa. And so the efforts of Eric Killmonger and Storm were really designed to just kind of take on the forces of Moon Knight. But a lot of Eric Killmonger's resentment towards T'Challa was rooted in the idea that Wakanda was isolationist, right? With all their technological advancements, they could have used that to free Africa, but instead, they chose not to. And so when you initially have Eric Killmonger and Storm, who encounter Black Panther and actually save his life, there is some kind of, I wouldn't say disdain, but there's certainly a distaste with regards to how Wakanda carries itself in relation to the struggles of Africa as a continent overall. But what ends up happening is that Eric Killmonger and Storm are brought in to Black Panther's personal counsel as a thanks for saving his life, along with their own individual plot threads. And so that's why he's talked to as the Sword. And so that's why...
Hold on. Trying to see if there's a way I could reverse this.
in this conversation, Black Panther tells Eric Killmonger there is a thing that must be done. And Killmonger says, King T'Challa, right, I am your sword. I have been waiting. Is it war? The boy's message, the maker. And T'Challa says, indeed. And so at that point, Eric Killmonger just says, all this injustice, this deprivation, this rage I have felt my entire life, all because of one man. Can it be so simple? Because keep in mind, Eric Killmonger didn't know everything about the Maker, or the fact that the Maker had hopped and skipped through the time stream and changed so much of this universe's history. And so T'Challa tells him, right, no, of course not. Our problems are much older than the Maker, as old as man itself. Because people are no different than just conducting a chemistry experiment, right? You want to see how two chemicals react to each other? Put them in a beaker and add heat. So as long as you have three people in a room, right, if they're in that room long enough, eventually tempers are going to flare, and eventually they'll start fighting one another for one reason or another. So that's why he talks about, being older than man. It's the nature of human nature, right? All it simply means is that in the here and now, the Maker is the most current representation of human nature, as far as it manifesting in the form of a bad guy looking to seize power. But he says, if we are to solve them, right, these problems, if we are to free a continent, all peoples, the Maker cannot be allowed to return. He would have the entire world in chains or no world at all. And so that's why he says, I did not name you my sword. I named you the Sword of Wakanda. So be the sword, Eric Killmonger. Be our vengeance and our protector. Kill the Maker. And so that's where he basically goes on his own mission. And so for the most part, it just kind of follows him. Now, to this particular bit of a conversation here, you jump back over to Howard Stark, and he kind of starts filling things back in again for Tony and the rest of the Ultimates. Right? And he says, my machine men could not kill the Maker, despite endless numbers, destructive power, and lightning fast artificial intelligences. The invincible Iron Army was made in my image, neural networks modeled on my perfect mind. And that's where the current iteration of Death's Head is just like, it was a big mistake, right? They just spend all day exchanging lewd messages in binary and hacking their own systems to simulate altered states. And that's where Howard continues on, and he says the Deathlocks could not kill the Maker, constructed from the corpses of dead children, purged of the Maker's taint, death incarnate. And that's where Death's Head says he meant them to be mindless, but some defect in the design means they spend most of their time composing bad science fiction short stories, fumbling awkwardly with big questions about life, death, and the future in the turgid prose of death. And America Chavez is like, I'd actually like to read some of that.
Texas is growing, and the demand for skilled workers is needed more than ever.
But again, Howard kind of continues on with this bit of a story. And he says, of course, there is Death's Head 23, my latest field commander. But again, Death's Head's like, I'm actually version 22, but, whatever. And Howard just says, one of my finest designs, ruthless, unstoppable, and completely for sale, an entrepreneur to his nuclear core. Of course, he is no Death's Head 21. But that's where America's like, I don't really understand. How can he be a soldier of fortune? Like, you even have an economy here, right? Much less currency. And that's where Howard is just like, I invented a digital currency for just this purpose, Starbucks. And I can give you some, right, if you have something to sell. And while Death's Head is like, they're only redeemable in the gift shop, and Peter's excited about there being a gift shop, right, Howard Stark is like, it's closed for remodeling. And Death's Head's like, it's been closed for remodeling, like, since forever. But again, kind of getting back on track, right, America says, what is this place anyway? Are we even still in the city? And that's where things start to become really interesting. Because Howard Stark says, no, this is Limbo, the place where nothing ever changes. And initially, Tony asks, right, the hell dimension that's ruled by Ilyana Rasputin, but the response of Howard is no, right? Everything here is living on borrowed time. Limbo is composed of stolen seconds, a few from one century and a few from another. We are everywhere and nowhere at once. Now, of course, this is based entirely on the Limbo dimension from the main Marvel Universe, which is exactly what it sounds like. Right? In Marvel Comics, you have two Limbos, the Hell dimension that's ruled by Ilyana Rasputin, so it's a demonic realm, and then you have the Limbo where Immortus resides. Like, it exists outside of time and unaffected by time, which kind of allows Immortus to sort of monitor everything, right? One of the things we've talked about over the years is the relationship between Immortus, Kang, Iron Lad, which we won't necessarily go into here, but Immortus is basically what Kang the Conqueror will ultimately become, and that's why he resides outside of space and time instead of trying to manipulate things to conquer all of reality. But Tony Stark is seeing this, right? He asked the question, Is that your Immortus engine? And Howard just says the Maker Mind is powerful, yes, but still, it is limited to 3 dimensions. The Lord of Time knows no such limits. And he says, that's me, but he cannot follow us here. And then the question's asked, why would the Maker still be limited, right? He's had thousands of years to fix himself. But that's where Howard says, who knows, right? There are holes that can never be filled. And he says absences that are reflected and magnified.
All right, y'all. I'm gonna stop the video right there because I honestly don't want to react to it anymore. But yeah, give me y'all opinions on Avengers, Doomsday, Avengers, Secret Wars, some things you like to see, some things you like for them to incorporate. Yeah, we're supposed to be getting Incredible Hulk back, thank God. Because what the fuck are they gonna do against Doctor Doom without an Incredible Hulk? Of course, Scarlet Witch better not be dead for real. She needs to come back. We got Magneto. Professor X can't do shit in that little wheelchair, little weak ass. Yeah, y'all. Thank you for tuning in, though. Peace.